Thank you for listening to the Cancer Has No Borders podcast. Today, I'm thrilled to be speaking with Chairman, Co-founder, CEO, and President John V. Oyler. John started the company nearly 15 years ago and has evolved the company to a global company with offices in over 40 countries. We have products in over 70 markets across the globe on 5 continents. This year in 2025, the company is going through a transformation with the intent to change the company name to BeOne Medicines. Today, John and I will be talking about his life and how he started the company. Welcome to the podcast, John.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Let's start off by telling me a little bit about your family that you grew up with and tell me about your sisters.
Sure. Well, I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm the middle child, an older sister and a younger sister. My oldest sister is actually a Japanese literature professor, and my younger sister is an environmental biologist. Growing up in Pittsburgh, I grew up during the 70s, which was not a great time for the economy in Pittsburgh. It was really rough. It was an incredible time for the sports teams in Pittsburgh, and I'm, of course, a lifelong Steelers fan and a lifelong Penguins fan. And that was a fun time from a sports perspective growing up there.
Great. And tell me about your mother and father, what they did for work. I've heard they had a very interesting kind of career path.
My father grew up in Bridgeville, which is a small town outside of Pittsburgh that was largely, ex-coal town full of immigrants. And he went and got an engineering degree, actually eventually got a PhD from Carnegie Tech, which is now CMU. He was a practicing engineer for many years and built large manufacturing facilities all across the world. And I'd see him travel and get postcards from South America, from Australia, from Europe, wherever he might be. But he was always back and super present guy. From that perspective, when he kind of finished his professional working career, he actually became a professor at University of Pittsburgh. And when he did that, he had a 28-year career there and helped put together a lot of their senior design process there for civil engineering, and actually taught till he was 88, retired, but still teaches. He's 93 today.
That's ambitious.
So it doesn't really teach, but still goes in and does all the projects. It's really nice.
Yeah. And what was your mom's career? What was she doing as you were growing up?
Sure. My mom grew up in Grove City, which is a small town just north of Pittsburgh. And she worked her way through a master's degree and became a counselor for people who lost their vision at the Pittsburgh Guild for the Blind. So she really would help people, a lot of diabetics or folks in car crashes that needed to make a change in their lives. And, that's nonprofit. She was not well paid, but I've never seen someone with higher job satisfaction. And she just absolutely loved what she did. I think my father really loved what he did. And to both of them, a lot of it was the interactions they had with people, the close ties they made with the people they worked with, and the impact that they were able to have. And I think that's something that, I aspire to be half as good as either of them were.
Oh, that's great. And tell me what your neighborhood was like whenever you were growing up. Did you have a lot of friends in the neighborhood? Did you have people that you're still in touch with? Can you tell me a little bit about them?
Well, I grew up on a small dead-end street that had forest across the street from us.
Okay.
And so there were a lot of little kids, and we'd run across the street in a way no one would ever let you now, into the woods and disappear and make forts and dam the river and have a great time. But as a young kid, I loved to read. I wanted to find, the Tom Sawyer, Huck Finn, kind of close friendships that you were reading about. And I can remember making my first friend who actually lived in a house at the bottom of our street. His name was Griff. And I was so thrilled I had my lifelong friend.
Yeah.
And that was wonderful. But this was a really tough time in Pittsburgh. And during that time, suddenly one day, we were down in his basement, watching his color television, which was a special thing at that time. We didn't have one. And I could see that his parents had a lot of stress. You could see it as a kid. You didn't really know what it meant. And then a couple days later, he said, look, I'm sorry, we're moving. And, my dad, lost his job where he was working, and we have to move. And, I was devastated. I was never going to have a friend again. And he was a wonderful guy. And, watched his family go through the process of moving and the stress, and it was tough. And I thought, this is going to be tough. But, you're a kid, and I went to first grade, and pretty quickly in first grade, I met this kid, Jay. And Jay was the fastest kid ever. He could outrun anyone. I was pretty fast, but he could outrun me. And we'd run through the woods and have a great time. And it was going to be great again.
Yeah.
And about 18 months into that, he told me his father had lost his job and he was moving. And this was absolutely devastating again. And I thought, I'm completely screwed. And, I went through this again, for a third time. And I thought, I'm never, ever going to have any friends. And actually, after that, a couple moved into the house next door to us. And when they did, I told the mother of that family, I'm not meeting your kids. I don't want to meet your kids because you're going to live here 2 years and you're going to move. They've lived in that house forever.
Okay.
Unfortunately, we've recently lost her to cancer.
Oh.
But she has, 3 wonderful kids, and her husband lives in the house next to my father, and they're good friends.
Yeah.
And they've been there ever since. So fortunately, I was wrong.
Okay, good.
But I think at a really young age, I understood, how impactful a good job is on people. And I also think I understood, when you don't have that, how much stress it places on a family, on friends, on everyone. And even as a little kid, laying in my bed, I don't know, probably in second or third grade, I would dream about, couldn't we just live somewhere where people had good jobs, and how important is a good job? And I thought, this is what I want to do when I grow up. I want to find a place where everyone works together. This was really, a dream that I had at that time.
Yeah. Tell me about your college years. Where did you end up going to college, and how did you pick your college that you went to?
Sure. So I loved to read. I loved math. I loved science. And I did a lot of science in high school. I had a brilliant teacher there, Miss Hutchison, and she taught scientific math ed and taught us how to do experiments. And I just thought, this is absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
With this vision of the type of place I wanted to be, I really wanted to be at Bell Labs. And unfortunately, like AT&T broke up Bell Labs as I was heading towards college. But I looked around and I thought, I want to do science. I was very interested in a few places, but I found myself accepted at MIT and went there and visited. I was a little concerned, what's it going to be like? But I went there and visited, met a bunch of people I really liked. And I decided to go to school there. And my thought as I went was I would probably study science, but I also was interested in entrepreneurial things and, how you make a company.
What were some of the things that you were doing as you were going to MIT? Were you doing anything outside of studying and kind of thinking about what do you want to, you want to be an entrepreneur? Did you think about that at MIT and think about what's my plan to do this?
Well, I was very, serious about the education because MIT was quite expensive and I had scholarships to go other places. And from that perspective, my family was kind of children of the Depression, my mom and dad. And the only debt our family ever had was the mortgage on our, $27,000 house that we bought a long time ago. It's a very nice house, by the way. It's not that we weren't poor by any stretch of the imagination. We did just fine. It was a nice place. And it is a nice place. And I love to go home and see my dad. But that was the only debt. We were not that kind of family, not for a car, not for anything. And to go to MIT, we had to take debt. And so as I went there, we were very serious about, I'm going to work while I'm there so we can pay down the debt because we don't like debt. To that extent, MIT had the promise of when you go to school there, you can actually do research with professors and get paid.
Wow.
So it sounds good, but I got to school, I went to all the professors and they said, you're a freshman, come back when you're a senior.
Got it.
And so I couldn't, and this was kind of the promise I made is I'm going to work and
Yeah.
contribute some money back. So, I began working at the donut stand, which when you walked in the lobby of MIT 77 Mass Ave, there was a donut stand in that lobby, which sold coffee,
Yeah.
not fancy coffee like we have today, but hot coffee to cold people because in Boston it was always winter. And we sold coffee and donuts to, a lot of the professors, a lot of the students when they came in. And I did this to, help support school. Then I swept at the tennis bubble, which was an even better job because you could study while people played
Yeah.
and sweep in between. You did a little scheduling and checking people in and out, but you could study too. And eventually, doing different odd jobs, I began my own business there with my college roommate.
Oh, what business?
Well, we started a business to sell carpets, bookshelves, and refrigerators to college students when they came back at the beginning of the year to their dorm rooms.
That's pretty genius actually, because every year you have new clients, right?
Yeah, so he and I, kind of set this thing up and it was very successful. And we, had several dozen people working for us, we made a lot of money
Yeah.
and it was very fun. But we immediately realized there's a ton of stuff we don't know. Like logistics, if you don't plan things, there's a lot of extra hard manual labor and you're late to go to the sites. You've got to distribute to many different colleges, a portfolio of different carpets of different sizes, different colors. You really need to think it through. If you don't think it through well, you pay with hard labor. So I'm probably one of the true CEOs of a company that from the beginning has really believed the logistics are unbelievably important and really appreciated,
Yeah.
the people that are working in that aspect of a company because they really can make your life a lot easier or they can make it a lot harder.
And Boston's kind of a perfect place to do this because you have so many different colleges
It's
there,
true.
right? I mean,
It's true. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And you learned a lot. I was working with my college roommate who is a brilliant salesperson. And I think, a young girl came up to me and said, I don't know if I'm interested in buying this carpet. And I said, okay, well, I'll give it to you $5 off. No, I'm not sure I'm interested. I lowered the price $5. And I kept doing this and she just wasn't interested. And he came over and said, excuse me, can I talk to him for a second? And he walked away and he said, you don't understand what you're doing. Her issue isn't the price. You need to understand, listen to her. What's her issue? Her issue is she doesn't like what you have here. She doesn't like the colors. She doesn't like the patterns. And he said, watch this. And he went over and talked to her and said, well, what are you interested in? And that's what she said. And then he said, why don't you come back tomorrow? She really was interested in a red carpet. And so tomorrow we brought a red carpet back and he jacked the price up 50%. It didn't matter because she wanted a red carpet and we had a red carpet. And I really learned a lot through that process. It was a lot of fun.
So this helped your kind of getting. I mean, you were an entrepreneur at that point.
It made me super interested in entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
And I realized there's so much to learn here. It's hard, it's challenging, it's dynamic. It's about managing people. It's about thinking strategically. It's about thinking logistically. There's so many levels. And I really, really enjoyed it.
That's awesome. So tell me when you realized you wanted to become an entrepreneur. Was it at this point or was it before that? And then once you were in MIT and you started this company, to this logistics company, after you left MIT, where did you go to next? Is that where you went to Stanford?
Well, I think that the seeds of entrepreneurship happened when I was a little kid and my love of science. I think both of those as I was still in Pittsburgh. I think that the crystallization, I really wanted to build my own company for sure, definitely happened with this experience at MIT. No question. And I said to myself, I love science. And I looked at my parents and I said, I want to do something that's going to help people, that's going to have impact. It can't just be make money. No interest in that. You're not going to love your job unless you help people, unless you're doing something meaningful. I really knew that at a young age. But I think, as I said, I want to do entrepreneurship. I have a lot to learn was the lesson I got from this experience. So when I graduated from MIT, I joined McKinsey because I thought McKinsey's known for training people in business. I'll go work there a couple years. And when I finish working there a couple years, I'll do an incredible job. They'll pay for business school. And then I can go to business school and learn a little more and take things from there.
And so you worked at McKinsey for a couple of years, and that's whenever you had attended Stanford after
Yeah,
working at
after
McKinsey.
3 years at McKinsey, I said, "I'm going back," and I was excited to go to Stanford because winters in Boston were long and cold, and I dreamed of, beach paradise, and so I headed to Stanford, and, when I got to Stanford, it was, wonderful. I loved California. I loved the climate. The business school was spectacular, and I met all sorts of interesting people.
Yeah, tell me about some of the people you met there.
Well, tons of folks, but, I, you know, would spend a lot of time with my closest friends going skiing.
Okay.
And, every weekend we drive 3.5, 4 hours. Unless it snowed, it could be 12 hours up to Tahoe.
Okay.
And then we'd spend all weekend, sitting on a lift chair, riding up and then skiing
Yeah.
down. And it really was just an incredible ability to get to know a lot of people, very, very well. And from that perspective, I got to learn more about business. I realized I absolutely love skiing, and it's one of my favorite things in the world to do. And I got to, know people that I really, really enjoyed spending time with quite well.
Great. And I guess you really get to know somebody when you're sitting in a car with somebody for 3 to 4 hours going there and then coming back, or if it's a 12-hour trip, you really get to know them.
One of our 12-hour trips, actually, we were stuck coming back, not going up. And I think the guy I was with in the car played the song Sweet Caroline until we could get through the snow, and we had to sing it for 4 hours straight. So, lots of funny
So would you
stories
ever
and
do
lots of
karaoke for that
experience.
song since you probably know the words by heart?
Well, if you heard me sing, no one would ever want me to do karaoke. I'm happy to sing along, but people will disperse rapidly.
Yeah, got it. So after you left Stanford, and it sounds like you had a great time there, tell me what you
It was
did
wonderful.
after.
Well, I went back to McKinsey for a year because they paid for school.
Okay.
And the second they were done paying for school, I left because I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur and I felt like I'd learned what I could from McKinsey. And I left with a good friend of mine who was 10 years older, but also from McKinsey. And we wanted to do something together. And I was interested in anything that I thought was important and had impact. I was interested in education. I was interested in the environment. I was interested in energy because energy is tied to so many things. And he was absolutely interested in healthcare. And actually, his father had been a senior executive in the pharmaceutical industry. And as a result, I think he just had followed the industry and had a love for it. And he kept saying, we should do biotech. We should do biotech. Well, at this time, there were almost no non-MD PhDs, in business positions or executive positions, or certainly starting biotech companies.
Okay.
Really, there were almost none. There weren't ex-McKinsey people. There weren't ex-Stanford people, maybe one or two. But like the industry, it was not full of people that looked like us. And we went out and said, we want to start a company. And no one was interested in us. And it would have been very easy to do other things. I was still going skiing all the time. I was actually skiing and snowboarding with a bunch of the senior people starting Yahoo and Excite and, hearing all about all the opportunities in that area.
Yeah.
But he really wanted to do something that mattered. And, I thought Yahoo, Excite, I don't know. Does this matter or not? I believed in the internet, but does this matter or not? I don't know. But like healthcare, I could get behind. So the only thing we could really find was an investor who had bought 51% of kind of a failed publicly traded company.
Okay.
It had had great investors, Kleiner Perkins and other folks, but it was failed. He put in $3 million for 51% of the company, and he hired us to be the public,
Yeah.
management. And we started working with him, and we raised some additional money that really he raised, but we helped administer it. And then we started 7 phase 2 programs and very quickly had a complete remission in non-Hodgkin's lymphoma.
Wow.
And that was fun. And there was excitement. And ironically, this company, it was called Genta, was doing antisense towards BCL2. Now, Sonro, which is a great product we have, is a BCL2 inhibitor.
Okay.
So I was working on BCL2 at that time. Now, the other thing, this was antisense, which antisense was the precursor to siRNA, which is mRNA. This was the beginning of the nucleic acid field. And there were really 4 companies playing around in that space at the time, and Genta was one of the 4 at that point. So we got things going. The company did quite well, became worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Okay. And we weren't really comfortable with the situation we were in. We didn't necessarily love the investor style, just cultural. And so we decided we wanted to move on and do something else. And this was getting bigger and a little over our head. So we said, why don't we hire somebody else to come in? And we mutually found that transition to different leadership. The company eventually went up to, I think, 1.7 billion.
Wow.
And did really well. And for us, even though we were there, not for years, but for a short period of time, we made a little bit of money, which was nice, and were rewarded for the success that we had there. So that was the first thing I did when I left school.
And then after you left this company, what was your next step? What were you doing next?
Well, so we left. My partner got married and moved to Boston. Okay. And I still was like, winter's a little long. Maybe I'll stay in California. And this company that we were running had been in San Diego. So I was like, I'm going between San Francisco and San Diego. I have all the best of California. I'm going to Tahoe too. It was really good life. So I wasn't ready to move to Boston with him. And about that time, really a friend of mine, but someone I knew from my Stanford business school community and from going to Tahoe, on my way to Tahoe said, stop and see me. And I did. And he shared an idea that that another gentleman had, that was talking to him about starting a company in the mobile wireless space. Well, this was early for mobile wireless. I think I was just getting my first cell phone around there.
Okay.
That time. And
big brick.
This was probably the Motorola flip phones kind of stage. It wasn't really the big brick still. Okay. But he was not sure either, but this guy had a concept of building a company that would essentially be like IMS or IQVIA for the healthcare industry, like Nielsen for the TV industry, but provide that type of service on mobile devices. Those are very profitable, kind of sole player opportunities. And we realized we could go in and build that for mobile wireless. And I think we realized mobile wireless was going to be huge. And I thought, this is a good idea. And ultimately, Nielsen will have to buy it. Yeah. And so economically, it makes a lot of sense. The technology was really cool because I got to learn all about, how mobile works and, CDMA and TDMA and, how systems don't work actually that well, why your phone drops because your call is being dragged. So it was really interesting. And we built a pretty successful business that, enabled me to have personal relationship with a lot of the senior people in all of the mobile wireless companies, to meet the tech people that building the chips at Qualcomm and at other places, the browser companies. And so it was wonderful. We really got to be at the heart of this industry. With the caveat, we pitched every VC in Silicon Valley, and they all said, why are you doing wireless? It's all about the internet. Wireless is too small. Don't do that. Now they're all in mobile now. And but we pitched all those guys. None of them gave us money. We had to raise angel money from the wireless industry, basically those executives that had been early in that industry. So we went off and I spent 4 years really building that company with this person. And, it was wonderful experience and later was sold.
Great. And then how did you get back into kind of the healthcare pharma world though? Because you sold this company, the wireless company, or you got out of it, and then what was your next step? Did you decide you wanted to? You still seemed like you had a passion for healthcare or the pharma industry. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
At this time, I had some changes going on in my life and some things that I, began to deal with and think about. And the first was, one of the guys that I'd skied with, who was, brilliant ski straight down the hill. He was pitch perfect when he sang, just very special person. He had left to go build the first, privately owned investment bank in Russia and was doing really, really well. And while he was there, until the Russian economy crashed, then he wasn't doing quite as well. But about that time, he was diagnosed with ALS. And, all of our friends started to try to support him going through this, absolutely terrible and devastating disease. And that was very tough because he's one of the more vibrant, entrepreneurial, excited, people I knew. And while we were dealing with that, and he's one of the guys I skied with every weekend at Tahoe. While we were dealing with that, another one of the guys who I was extremely close to was killed in a car accident. And, recently married, spectacular wife, just, magical couple who you saw and thought, this is what true love is like. And then, watched, just the destruction forces that played on his family and her family and all of our friends, and just terrible, absolutely terrible. He was also an entrepreneur building his own business. There weren't a lot of entrepreneurs at that time. When you said you were an entrepreneur, people said, what is that? No one says that anymore. But, he was off building his own business, really, a kindred spirit for sure. And I was devastated by that. And I came back to, one of my ex-McKinsey friends who's British, and he actually had continued at McKinsey and at that time had moved to Brazil. And he said, I've just met this wonderful woman. She was Irish. We're both going to Brazil. We don't have friends here. Why don't you come spend some time with us and, try to recover because you're dealing with all this stuff. And I wasn't working and I went and spent time with them and they, helped me, face that, very, very difficult time. And I was thinking a lot about what I wanted to do at that point in time. And, sadly, I lost him too a couple years later and 2 young kids. And, it was a rough, patch for me. But it was 100% clear to me in that process that death is terrible, not just for the person, it's terrible for everyone. And I said, I want to fight for life. That's what I'm going to do. The rest of my life, wireless is interesting, but what I want to do is fight for life. And if I can help one person, one family, one set of friends avoid that, that's as worthwhile as it gets. So turned around and said, I'm going to go back into biotech and this is what I want to do.
That will do it for our first part of our podcast interview with John Oyler. And our second part, we'll be talking about the vision of the company, how we do clinical trials internally, and get a little bit more into details about John's family. Thanks so much for listening. Be sure to follow us and subscribe to our podcast on Amazon, Spotify, Apple, or iHeart. You can also subscribe to the video version of the podcast on YouTube. Thanks so much.